Hi everyone, and a big warm welcome to this wonderful panel about new remote and hybrid strategies. Today we're going to discuss how to repurpose the office space to drive innovation and what it takes to bring people back to the office if that's what is right for your company. If it's not, then what it takes to create an environment that fits an inclusive workforce, enabling everyone to work in the best possible fashion to create results. So I'm super delighted to welcome the panel. Just a quick introduction of myself. My name is Matthias. I'm a co-founder of a platform called Worksum. We're a startup, 100 people throughout the end of the year. And what we do is we build a freelance management platform. So a place where companies that work with a big contingent workforce can manage, contract and pay these people globally in a seamless way. So I want to introduce the panel. Katrina, tell us a bit about who you are and why you are here.
Thank you very much. Hi, hello everyone. My name is Katrina Kostic-Samen. I am the founder and head of KKS Savills. I've been a BCO board member for the last 12 years, and 2 years ago was the BCO president. I've also run my own design studio, and we are 32 people in London working on global projects. And following the sale of my practice, KKS, to Savills, we now represent a global occupier contingent workforce as well. And so I'm very interested to hear from my fellow colleagues about how technology plays in the world of a balanced workplace.
Wonderful, thanks, and great to have you on board. Matt, over to you.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Matt Watts. Thank you for having me first and foremost. I really appreciate the opportunity to share views and topics with the rest of the panel. I'm the current Chief Commercial Officer, CCO, for a flexible workspace company known as Labs, predominantly in London with locations dotted around Europe as well. We are dare I say, a high design technology enabled business that allows companies of all shapes and sizes to have a place to work, live, play, thrive, be productive. We're actually owned by a parent group known as LabTech, and LabTech is a multi-channel organization. As well as commercial real estate interests, we own a series of service departments, hotels, Camden Market, retail, and a few other bits and pieces in there for good measure. So we are an omni-channel organization looking at things from very much from the consensus of a hospitality remit, putting the customer very concentrically at the heart of everything we do.
Yeah, amazing. Great to have you on the panel. And Michael, introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Matthias. So it's Michael Woolett from Zoom. So thank you very much for having me on the panel today. My role within Zoom is looking after Zoom Rooms in our international business. So I think most people by now are probably familiar with Zoom as a meetings platform. My role and my team's role is helping organizations return back to the office. So looking at very much from a hybrid working point of view. My role spans our international business, so anything outside of the US. So really looking at right the way from APAC to EMEA and across all vertical markets. So it's great to work with customers, understand what they're doing in the different territories, how they're being impacted and how they're remaining agile to cope with the challenges ahead. Prior to my role at Zoom, I've had 20 years or so experience within collaboration, working for both startups and big tech such as Cisco. So lots to share, and I look forward to the discussion today.
Wonderful. So great to have you all three on board. Katrina, I want to start with you. Are you back in the office? It's now been about 1.5 years since COVID first introduced itself to the world. And it looks like you're back. How's that going? Oh, you're on mute, Katrina. Has to happen in every call, right?
That will be the T-shirt coming out of this the last 2 years. We are back. We are back since April 12th, when the government allowed us to come back this time. Last year, we actually pretty much stayed open the entire time. The initial sort of March to May, we did retreat home, but from last May, we encouraged people that if they needed to come back safely, they did. And there's quite a few people that the core that wanted to come back. So I would say last year we were fairly open. Beginning of this year we were shut until April. So it's nice to get everyone back. We are very excited now that hopefully soon, come next week, August 19th, that we will get back full use of not being pinged and safety coming back to the office.
Yeah. How many are back now versus before COVID?
I have a guideline in place that I bring everybody back on a minimum of 2 days a week, and come September, it'll be 3 days a week. And that really is a guideline that I'd like to see promote. If people are scared or nervous, then obviously they do have the right to have a chat and discussion about it. But I think it's very important that people do get outside, they go and experience other things, not just coming to the office to see people, but they're also traveling again. They're seeing the blue sky, they're seeing things about life, and not being scared at home in a bubble. So I'd like to make sure that there is a guideline and a safe place that they can come back to the office, and feel quite strongly that organizations that are just say you do what you like are not the ones that are going to actually succeed in terms of building the personality back and bringing the culture back, and which is what I'm very intent to make sure that we retain.
Yeah. Matt, you have, I think, 14 locations around London, hosting hundreds, if not thousands of people. Are people back?
It's been a real journey, actually. It's been quite a roller coaster, where we all stepped into the world of an unknown. You go back to sort of March, April, May 2020, and the buildings were just completely void of human beings. And actually most of the people who were sort of dotted around buildings were probably security, cleaning, maintenance staff to make sure the buildings are being kept to the best of the standards and essential services and so on and so forth. Where we saw a brief bounce back of people, human beings, sort of end of August, September last year within the UK environment. And then of course we then stepped into various other lockdowns throughout that period. I think the big change has probably come towards the end of Q1 2021, where we've seen sort of steady increases of footfall throughout the buildings. And I need to touch on footfall in various different ways. We are not a business that says we've got to put bottoms on seats all day, every day. Hybrid working, in my opinion, has been around for many, many, many years. I believe it's more prominent in our way of life and our way of working and living and playing. But if I walk around our buildings today, we will see we are certainly not back to pre-pandemic levels of people, but we are certainly seeing steady increases in footfall week on week. So instead of 100 a week, we are now seeing thousands a week, but we see them across different days and different working patterns for every organisation. So, and we're comfortable with that. We will work, we will engage, we will promote, we will support. I'm very keen to hear Katrina's views on, and how we can build culture by remote working patterns and different days of the week. And we are here, we're a facilitator of work. We're a facilitator of play, we're a facilitator of living. And if we can do those things and help companies understand, how property is part of a strategy and how technology can support that, then we're living and doing our jobs well.
And Michael, how is it at Zoom?
Yeah, it's but I've always been sort of fully remote. So from my point of view, there's not too much change in the daily life. I've been very fortunate to have a home office and been able to work from home. But we see certainly within Zoom, that's not the case, certainly for people early in career. So how do you start to balance? I think some of the points that have been mentioned already, getting people back to the office and managing that mental well-being and that sort of inclusion within corporate culture. So from Zoom, really like any of our other clients, we're working not only with our sort of the IT teams, but also with HR, with real estate, managing how do we help people get back safely. I think certainly the one thing I saw across all the regions we work with is that people weren't going to go back unless they could actually do it safely and ensure that people trusted their employers when they were going back. I think we all know we need to go back. I think we see that as human beings, we need interaction, we need to communicate. So it's really important, but again, it's the right time, I think, to be able to do that. And I think certainly what we've seen throughout the pandemic is that organizations or certain territories are starting to open up and then having to react and maybe shut down just because of certain sort of legislation meaning they have to do so. So I think having the tool sets and agility to be able to react to that is really important. But I think certainly from an innovation point of view, yeah, people like to be back in the office because that's where they feel they collaborate best.
Yeah, that's definitely one point that that I think everybody knows, that people seem to be collaborating way better when in the office. But I want to share an interesting statistic here. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can.
Here we go. So this is some new statistics that came out from the Office of National Statistics, and it basically shows why people prefer to either work from home or in the office. And it's divided in age groups. But on the first kind of bar, you can see that people think that they have, to a very large degree, improved work-life balance if they can work from home. And in the very bottom, you can also see, Michael, exactly to your point, that everybody seems to think that it's way harder to work together with others. So what's the ideal, and this is an open question, what's the ideal solution? How should companies that want to move fast again and really build a strong culture and give the best to their employees, how should they work with this and design themselves, and what kind of rules or principles should they apply to their workforce to get the best out of this?
I can probably jump in from a Zoom point of view on that. I think certainly some of the trends that we were seeing throughout. So I think, to your point, I think one of the big concerns coming into the pandemic were people were having to react overnight. And I think certainly we saw a lot of the marketplace almost accelerate to businesses having to digitize. So certainly when we look at it in Zoom, we look at it in three core areas. We look at sort of talent, transformation, and trust. So how do you sort of hire or retain talent and ensure that, as you say, things like productivity are high? And certainly, I think we were seeing across the board, actually, I work in an organization that's global. The danger is that you can have these back-to-back meetings. If people have availability to your calendar can fill up, and suddenly you're sitting there with sort of 10, 11 hours of meetings with no break. So I think
even Zoom fatigue has become a known term, right?
Yeah, and it's something we have to be really aware of. So I think there were concerns around productivity. I think that very early on, we saw that productivity wasn't a concern. In some cases, people were more productive. But then there was this mental health side to that. So I think as organizations were transforming and digitizing overnight, whether that was healthcare or education or financial services, what they were soon quickly realizing, and I think to the point you show on the slide here, is that there had to be a well-being side to it as well. And this is where areas like HR were getting involved for employee well-being and making sure people weren't suffering from burnout. They were taking the right breaks. They were looking after their health. And this is where I think now we're seeing organizations now have a much better understanding of the technology, know that they want to go back to the office, and are now reviewing as to what's the right balance, as you say, around should everybody go back? Is it right for certain individuals? And how do they start to do these studies? I think with where Katrina's mentioned now, how she's helping organizations back, really sort of reviewing that. So that's where we're working closely with business leaders and experts in that field to understand what that new office looks like and how we then align tech to tool that environment. Yeah.
So Katrina, we've seen companies that are, in both extremes. We've seen companies that want to get completely back to pre-COVID, pretty much forcing everyone to come back into the office. And we've seen companies like Spotify on the other end of the scale, who've more or less allowed everyone to work remotely. What do you think is the right balance and why?
I think it has to be right for you, for your own company and culture, first of all. So I'm going to use generalizations and real life experience. As far as myself, we've done a survey of our own staff. And although it's a smaller scale than a large global organization, the sentiments I think are the same, because we span 17 nationalities, we span young students all the way up to older ones in the profession. And what they did like, what you showed, is that from at home, is that they wanted to save commuting time, travel time was really the number one reason for home working, as well as at the time it was about safety and not knowing if, I think there was a lot of distrust, as Michael said, about whether the employer was going to provide a safe environment coming back. And it's not just a safe environment with gels and signs and things, because those kind of wash you out, but it's about other people's behavior and whether they will wear masks or they will respect your social distancing. So I think that is now going to dissipate as more and more people are vaccinated and do feel comfortable. So these things are moving quite quickly. The commuting, I think, is actually going to be a really good thing because it does give you a break in time. It does take away those 10, 12 hours sitting still, and it does force you to leave. We had one of the other negatives was that people work a lot of overtime in a design and architecture studio, and they prefer to be at home, not to then have to commute at 10 p.m. or whatever at night. But if you look at the positives of what they miss about home, what they like about home, they'd like in the office, they're really simple, quick wins. Plants. We've increased our amount of biophilia. We've always had an enriched environment. So we have smells, we have sound, we have music, we have color, we have texture, we have different light fittings. We have plants, we have rugs, as I said, we allow a dog to come in the office a few days a week. You know, we have basketball, we have an outdoor terrace. So that we've already got an enriched environment. And I think those organizations I go into and see that have none of this, that have your typical rows and rows of desks and white walls and gray carpet, are really, really far behind. And so they do have some things that they have to change. But as far as the quick wins, asking the staff, would you like an alternative? What would make you really happy? And they said, could I have oat milk or almond milk or an alternative to whole milk? Could I have more kitchen knives and another chopping board because I want to make my own salads? Could I have another microwave, please? So they're actually really quite simple things that you can do. And I think if you ask the people, and as an employer, it's quite scary to see what they say. But I think you will get so much more out of it if you can then manage those expectations and circle back around. It was interesting. We did last year through Savills a huge survey that we've just completed. Last year was 65,000 recipients throughout the UK. This year it was 100,000 throughout EMEA. And going back to the question that you raised about the young and the demographics, the young clearly are missing social, as we know, but they are missing the career progression, which was very clear on your slide. But on your comment or your headline about distractions, it was also very clear that they're the ones, obviously, that don't have the economic financial stability to have a quiet study or a conservatory or a second bedroom. And so the distractions are really quite easy to see what the outcome on your matrix was. So all of those things coming back to the office, the biggest concerns we have is acoustics. People have forgotten how to work with other people. It's very interesting. You bring people back and you think, oh, I didn't realize that this is what the office used to sound like, and we're not even fully back. So acoustics is probably, I would say acoustics and fresh air ventilation are probably the two big things that you're going to have to invest money in.
Are you basically saying that if companies want to bring their people back to the office, they need to definitely ramp up their office space and make it more appealing?
Without question.
Yeah.
Without question. I think it would be such a shame for people to have missed the opportunity in the last 18 months not to have made a change anyway. Notwithstanding COVID, I find it extraordinary that people move into homes, and probably the day you move in, you put your sofa where you have it, your painting above the sofa, and you probably never move it for 10 years or wait till you leave the house. I change my furniture and my paintings around probably twice a year, every few months. My husband goes crazy. But it just gives a different perspective. How many of us even turn a plan around? We get given something and we assume that's the way you're supposed to use it. Whereas really what you should be doing, take a floor plan, flip it around. Oh, I have a different view or perspective. Move the piece of art from here to this wall to that wall, and suddenly you have a new art program. There are really simple, quick wins that people can do. And I think it would be a shame if people, or employers, I should say, do nothing and are scared. What I get from everybody is that I don't want to spend the money right now because I don't know what the future of the workplace will look like. Let me tell you, nobody knows what the future of the workplace will look like. And in the 30 years I've been practicing, it keeps evolving anyway, regardless of one thing or the other. I think the biggest question I would have for Michael and others is the technology, because that really is an investment. I can, the cost of paint and plants and moving furniture around is very easy. It's really the tech. that I'm interested in hearing about.
What do you say, Michael? I guess before COVID, you would see a lot of office spaces that didn't necessarily kind of need conferencing technology in every room and so on. But I guess now you pretty much can't have any team meet up without some people not being in the office. So have you seen a surge in demand, or what's going on?
Yeah, it really has. It's been interesting, actually. As I say, I've been in video about 20 years and I've been a remote worker, and now it feels like the rest of the world is playing quick catch up, I think, around the capabilities, around the technology. But I think, to Katrina's point, I think what we are seeing now, in some cases, people's home technology is ahead of the office. So suddenly they jumped onto Zoom. Being a remote worker sort of 10 years ago, the technology probably wasn't there to support such capabilities. Now we've seen people overnight have great calls, high quality calls at home, and actually now coming back into the office and realizing actually they need to do some work in the office to sort of play catch up. So we have to have a balance, but some people don't have the money to spend, so we have to try and do the best we can with what they have and align that into infrastructure. The recommendation, if they can, is then to upgrade, to take advantages of advances in the technology. We've had to do a lot actually now as that new workspace changes, innovate with sort of best of breed, not just with Zoom, but best of breed things like good examples, AI technology. How do you start now to drive a room without touch, for example? So you, again, from a trust point of view, making people feel comfortable with technology, but again, as they come back into the office, trying to reduce touch points around how we balance, how do we leverage things like digital signage? So when they come into the office, to Katrina's point, how should they interact as an employee, and how do employers want to interact and start to direct people around the offices? So yeah, a really nice balance, as I say, and it's really important that we do align with the technology to really support that. We're also seeing a lot of what we're now seeing, hybrid events. Where not everybody can get into the office, but you want this inclusion, and people, if they can't get into the office, shouldn't be excluded. So again, how do you have to have this balance? Traditionally, you'd have a boardroom meeting, and if the person was brought in from home, they'd probably feel quite concerned because they're joining into a big level meeting and they're feeling almost on a lower peg. So we're having to do a lot around now from the meeting room, how everybody is that sort of talking heads, sort of equal meeting, so that everybody, it's a very inclusive environment. And I think where we are seeing employers is that they're leveraging their technology. Inclusivity is key. Nobody should feel concerned around using the technology or at a disadvantage by leveraging technology. So a real balance between that hybrid working.
So we recently bought an Oculus device for fun, which is a VR headset. And I haven't tried it yet, but there's an app for meetings where you can put this on, and then you are pretty close to kind of being in the same room as other people. And I guess, that's pretty far out. But again, today, most people work in an environment where they come into a meeting room and there's one big screen and a camera, and that's kind of how you interface together. What's the next thing? How long will that last until everybody's on VR and you can host conferences on the moon and stuff like that?
Well, I think, as Katrina mentioned, it's evolving, right? The thing I've learned in tech, it's evolving quickly. It's probably in some cases never quite as quick as you think, but it certainly gets there. And I think if you ask our CEO, Eric Yuan, if you ask him what the future looks like, it's interesting to hear Katrina mention around the office, the plants, the coffee smell. Eric wants to be in a position where you can sit on video and start to have those types of interactions, right? We're not there yet, but that's certainly his dream and thought to where he wants to start to take it. That I think you're just going to see the office environment and the home work environment just start to blend so much closer together. And where you've got advantages in one, others are trying to catch up to mitigate any sort of downfall.
Yeah, okay.
I think it's important to recognise that this workplace revolution that we've ended up going through, and this home place revolution has been forced upon us in a way that none of us ever anticipated. And whilst I am, people are going to think that we should have a natural biasness, well, me in particular in the businesses that I've worked in, to bring people back to work. Of course, I mean, we are a social species and we enjoy being with other people. I think most people generally accept that, okay? I think this idea of, Katrina made a lovely point around, rows and rows of desks, blue carpet, white walls, pretty mundane, pretty uninspiring environments I can absolutely understand why those people, employees, heads of HR, CFOs, CEOs are thinking, like, what are we going to do here? No one wants to come back to our environments, but there is definitely a flight to quality. And I think if you look at the data coming out from the major agents, if you look at some of the most well-known brands that we all live, breathe, and see and witness all day of our lives in regards to our, phones and things, those guys are really like leaders in the way that the workplace is now being engaged with. How does it smell? How does it look? Can I get my dry cleaning done? Can I see a dentist? Is there a gym on site? Is my colleague going to be there? How much space do I get per capita, per space? Can I go and use a lockup? So there is this wonderful revolution going on at the moment where people are actually coming into our spaces, and we are seeing some fantastic examples of people taking 5, 10, 15, 20, all the way through to 70,000 square foot space is the largest transaction our business has been involved with this year. But the headcounts that they're preparing for to come in the building are higher, but the desks they are providing are getting fewer because there are all these different touch point zones, collaboration zones, open meeting rooms, cafe areas, yoga studios, some things that I've never even had to think about. But we as landlords are no longer providing desks and chairs. Okay, we're not about that anymore. We are providing space for people to do as what they want. If we can convince occupiers, landlords, our own staff that this is a space to live, work, play, then that's cool. We're doing our jobs. But we've touched on it already. This video conference fatigue, this Zoom fatigue, which is being well documented. How often in our lives do we ever say, oh gosh, we're so busy, I've never worked harder, and I guarantee in 2 months' time I'll be turning around to my own bosses and loved ones and friends and saying, gosh, I've never worked harder. Time is so precious, and work-life balances are so much more apparent in how we talk and engage with our colleagues, with friends and loved ones, that we really think about what we do more and more. But people look at my diary, and I'm sure as Michael's touched on, as Katrina touched on, if people look at your diary and they see a gap, the amount of time spent per day on calls, video calls, teleconferencing calls is immense. And I think there are more and more studies coming out about what is an optimum level for us to spend in regards to those videos and conference calls, because you're on a video conference call or telephone call for 10 hours a day. Where do you actually do your work? And where do you actually play?
And to that point, there's been a lot of surveys suggesting, at least, I don't know if they prove it, but at least suggesting that people are more productive when they work from home. And a lot of surveys also where they ask people and they say themselves that they're more productive. Why is that? And what have we been doing wrong before COVID, if not kind of catering offices to people being really productive? Katrina.
I would absolutely disagree with that, in the sense that productivity has never been higher, in the sense, well, first of all, it's incredibly hard to measure productivity. So I would take any responses or any data analysis, again, with a grain of salt, depending on where it's coming from. As far as headlines go, we do know that people are working longer hours. And so those extra 2 hours, 1 or 2 hours that they've used for the commute are just sitting at home doing more work. So in order to maintain the same level of output, the day is by far getting 1 to 2 hours. And so in the UK, the average is about 1.5 hours added to every person's day. And it does vary across the board from 2 hours in the US to 1 in Europe. And culturally, that is a very big difference. But what also we know is that last year was the best year ever for most businesses. If you look at banks and you look at law firms, their bottom lines, they've had the best year ever. So a lot of people that are sitting on the COO, CFO, C-suite side are saying, wow, my people are more productive, my bottom line is better. I don't need to do anything, keep them all at home. But we do know that that's not sustainable. And so I do think that the commuting, that people don't like getting up at 5, 6 in the morning and maybe getting on a crowded train in the rain. But what it does do is that it does give you that me time. It gives you that time to read a book. It gives you that time to just sit and look out the window. And those are the things that we're not getting. We're not getting those moments. So the productivity, if you can measure it, is actually there because we've got the bottom line. But really, this is not a financial crisis that we've just been through like we were in 2008. This is a social crisis, and we are very quickly heading for the brick wall.
So if we agree that productivity is higher in the office and there's a lot of benefits to coming in, how should companies go about getting people to come back in? Should they force them? Should they create policies? Or should they keep it completely free, up to people themselves, how and when they want to come in? Or how often they want to come in?
I get asked this question every single day from companies as small as one person all the way through to companies of hundreds and thousands of people. It's always dangerous to sort of answer in certain respects, because every company has got a different ethos, a different culture, a different mindset. I think Katrina hit some brilliant points. The power of commute, I totally agree with, in terms of actually that 45 minutes an hour time. Some people really embrace that time as well. But productivity is, for me, has always been that question of immeasurability. So every company has to look at itself and go, actually, what's right for us and what's right for everyone else? Because I don't believe you can prove home working or office working is better one way or the other. I have some examples whereby some tech engineering businesses, they can have teams of 10 people. You can have one person over here who lives and works and plays in Glasgow, as an example, and he or she is absolutely smashing, nailing their work all day, every day. You've got 8 people who have an average day, and you have one person who has a terrible day due to distractions and other things, or technology goes down at home. As a team, they are therefore not productive. Therefore, the only way that company can work is to bring people together. So there are all kinds of different shapes and stories. I don't think there is one size fits all answer here that anyone can utilize.
What do you say, Michael? What do you see with your clients?
Yeah, it's been interesting. Some jobs don't allow you to work remotely, right? You have to be in the office. And I think what we've certainly seen is the points we're hearing come out is that people are evolving and having to evaluate almost daily as to what's the right thing. I think the one thing that tech has done is actually enabled sort of tooling where there were big concerns around people working from home, and I think mistrust of, out of sight, out of mind. If you're at home, you're not working. I think that's been firmly sort of put away now. And I think now people realize they can reach, can trust. And now it's an understanding. I think back to the point made, we've seen the bottom line disappear, I think, in a lot of cases for people around travel and expense policy. As people now introduce it, I think they'll happily introduce it. Obviously, people need to be back in, but we're going to see this sort of balance come out. The other thing that I think we certainly saw was it's not just internal, it's the reach now that people get out leveraging video, for example, out to their customer base. So if you're a bank or an educator or healthcare, you can now speak to the patient at home and have a good discussion rather than having to come in. And I think this is going to be important on the next level of the journey. We see a lot of discussions around climate concerns right now, and how do we leverage tech without people having to jump on flights all over Europe or across the world, when actually tech is a good example that they can leverage as a substitute. So I think a balance. I don't think there's a one size fits all. I think people have to reevaluate their own business and decide what's right for their culture and their employees.
Yeah.
I would just touch, Michael, on what you just mentioned about climate too, but I think what tech's allowed us to do is, for example, wearable technology has just mushroomed hugely in the last year, where it was always coming on board. It was always sort of deemed a little bit techie and a little bit sort of for those who are maybe healthy Fitbit kind of things. But actually, wearable technology, and the BCO has just launched a really, really good, very in-depth paper about wearable technology for the office. And it's not just about, how many steps have you walked, but, you can check who's going to be in the office. You can check if my teammate's going to be there. You can set up platforms that say, we need to be there together tomorrow or in 48 hours. So you can start to build the teams, the network, and why do you come is to see other people that you need to see and you want to see. You can start to gauge the air quality and the ventilation. We can, use it for apps. So the one hand, it's going to free us up because I think the technology will give us all that platform of information. The danger, the flip side is it can give us all that information. And what do you do with it? And I think, interestingly, we're at this sort of what I call the pendulum has swung, where we're all in the office, then we're all at home. Now we're somewhere in between. We've got this physical distancing, we're somewhere in between. We've got all this tech at hand, and we're somewhere in between. So it'll be very interesting to see how it all plays itself out.
Can be too connected as a society, right? In certain senses, we go back to working patterns 20, 30 years ago, where basically email was something quite primitive, and now you can be sent emails 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And as a human being, as a species, we're too connected sometimes. And you get hotels and vacations and holiday destinations now saying, come to us, no Wi-Fi, come to us, no TV. And it's interesting that these are the kind of key selling points for some of these organizations these days.
So one last question, and when you answer, I would like you to bring me a number, because if we look at pre-COVID and say that the index of people working from home or like in the office was 100, how do you think it'll be after COVID when all restrictions are lifted? Will 50% of people be in the office and 50% working from home? If we talk about jobs that can be done remotely, will it be 70? Will it be back to 100? Or what will it be? Katrina, give me your number and then a quick explanation to why.
Okay, first of all, I will say that memories are short. And I think once we get through the next year or so, we'll wonder what on earth just happened in the last 2 years, and people will revert to type and be back in the office more. But secondly, we were never, ever 100% in the office. All the workflow strategy reviews and occupancy and sensors that I do is always on an 85% average, on basically taking into account sick leave and holidays and all that. What we just never did was took away those desks, and we never asked people to share, and we never asked them to sit somewhere else, or accepted that they could actually be productive sitting in a booth versus at something called a chipboard counter. So I think what we do is I would start from an 85% that it was pre-COVID. I think when you start to dip down to 3 days a week, which is a 60% occupancy, I think we're going to be rising back up to a 75%, 80% review, or somewhere in between. You're not going to come back for 3.5 days, so you're not going to come for a half day. What you are going to do is be able to move around, and I think anyone that dips below 75% won't have that critical mass, that won't have that buzz, that won't have that team spirit, that culture. But anyone that needs to flex and be able to go down or go up should have the provision to do so.
Yeah. Okay. So roughly 3 days a week will be the average in the office.
I think you're going to see, certainly in city centers such as London, it's going to creep up to 4.
Yeah. What do you think, Michael? What's your number? If 85 was the starting point, what will it be after COVID?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I think the difference is I don't think the actual percentage will change dramatically what it was beforehand. I think what we certainly saw, particularly with SARS in APAC, where it took time for people to come back. So I think, as Karina mentioned, I think it's going to take a bit of time for people to come back. But again, I think over time they're soon forget, providing, as I say, we don't have the pandemic lingering on, and I think that's still a very open question. I think what we will see is, although the percentage probably doesn't change too much when people do get back, the number of days, as highlighted, will change quite dramatically. I think a lot of people are saying they need that at least 1 or 2 days touch point in the office to go in, whether it's, we're seeing a lot more people look at it as events now. I've seen a lot of the banks say, actually, we're looking at it almost as an events business. What's the events day happening in the bank for that particular, whether they're internal events for employees or whether they're customer type focused events. And I think certainly we see people needing to go in at least 1 or 2 days a week. Yeah. Whether that then becomes 3 days a week, I think it's going to be interesting to see. And there can be certain jobs where people need to be fully back in. So I don't think the actual percentage will change too much. I think there will be a drop off maybe on 1 or 2 days where people were going in a lot, but actually now realize with the leveraging tech, they don't need to be always on.
Yeah. All right, Matt. So we've got 3 days from Katrina, 1 to 2 days from Michael. What's your number and why?
Well, I'm more in the camp of Katrina based on trends and historical things that I've witnessed and seen. So I can have a building which is contractually 100% full, but due to collaboration spaces, kitchen breakout spaces, holidays, sickness, people being able to access other buildings within the campus, even if I was 100% full on paper, we would very rarely see things creep above sort of 70, 80% occupancy on any given day. And take any Friday in my career, okay, any Friday, I mean, a lot of people disappear quite quickly on a Friday. It's amazing how hard it is to get hold of people after 12 o'clock on a Friday, right? So I talk about the hump effect. Mondays you ramp up, peak days Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday you plummet, where people begin to disappear. I can already see our buildings beginning to creep back into that habit. It will become a problem for companies if that 100% of people will only want to do Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, because that's the day they want. They want the Friday at home and they want the Monday. Employers need to think about that. So how you spread people around. But I generally believe we become creatures of habit. There will be this, as Katrina said, this is relatively short term. And I think we will end up seeing more and more people back in the buildings. So I am definitely going back into the camp of, I believe we're heading back to where we were beforehand, of that 70-80% occupancy. And I expect we're going to be seeing that probably even as early as September, October this year in some buildings.
All right, wonderful. So what you're saying is basically you can expect people to want to go back anywhere between 1 to 3 days a week, maybe a little bit more, but it will take, Katrina, to your points, a lot of work in terms of making the office a place where people actually want to come in and have a great experience, events, but also the ability to focus and have a high productivity and not be disturbed. And the last point is, I guess, Michael, to your point, that you will need to have the right technology, otherwise it will not work. Katrina, Matt, and Michael, thank you so much for joining this panel. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah, enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.